Now we come to our closing panel, and the panels just get bigger and bigger. We have 4 on stage and 2 joining online. Welcome to you again, Professor Glaser. Thank you very much indeed for being here. So this is to discuss innovation, smart cities, and just generally reflect on the day. Jan, you were nodding a lot while you were listening to Paul, and you were listening also to Carlo. What's your reflection on smart cities?
Everything which can be digitized will be digitized in today's world, but everything which can be digitized can also be copied. What can't be copied is human interaction between creative people, and that is the core of a city, as you mentioned here early on. So smart cities can only be based on smart people, but you need to understand that in a proper way, and there is my second point. I'm coming from Finland, which is well known, according to several PISA studies, to have the best primary school in the world. But here is the secret which I can release. We don't have the best schools in the world. We have the best worst schools in the world. And here I come into the discussion we had a little bit earlier, that the more equal a system is, the better possibilities you have also to become a truly smart, innovative city.
Serge, thank you very much. Serge, when we talk about innovation, what do you understand by that? Is innovation the same as progress?
No, I don't think so. And I am a little bit worried by the fact that in the discussion, in all the papers which are published, in all the journalistic papers, you find always the word innovation, and the word progress has more or less disappeared. And there is a difference between progress and innovation. Progress gives a feeling of the 18th century Enlightenment. It's a progression towards a better life. It's a progression which gives hope in the future. And this was the case not that long ago. When I was young, in the 1950s and 60s, we were really hoping in progress. It was a time when the race to the moon was active, and a lot of young people, young students were pushed into science and into physics because of this idea of progress. And now when we talk about innovation, innovation is more realizing new devices, new technologies, most of which will be used to make life possible in the future, and so to speak, to repair the problems that science has produced. And this gives a negative feeling to science, which I think is very worrying, because we need enthusiasm, we need hope, and I would prefer to have the word progress and the word innovation in all these discussions. Innovation, I read recently a paper by Gilles Leport, who is a professor at Harvard, an anthropologist or sociologist, who says that innovation was a word which was created in the, I think, 18th or 19th century to discuss new things which are not always good. And Washington is supposed to have said on his deathbed that you should avoid innovation in politics. And I think this is a good point here. Innovation is just to mitigate things which would mitigate bad things happening. And I think we have to open that to a more positive view. And I think the last word that you had in your small speech was progress. And you said it only once, but you said innovation 20 times.
Carlo.
Well, if I could just respond, I agree. I titled my Nobel lecture on the possibility of progress, but we have to understand how things feed into it. And to just think about the role of science, science made possible the innovation of, say, the CFCs as a class of chemical compounds. Science also identified the threat to the environment that the CFCs created. So science can, discover good things and harmful things, but science gives us the knowledge we need to respond. And we do need a government and a system of collective action that can stop the innovations that are actually harmful, that impede progress. So it really will be both innovation and collective governance that stops the bad innovations that will generate progress.
Nothing makes me happier than a panelist dying to come in. Carlo, go.
No, but just a quick question for all of us. Can we say from the beginning that actually innovation is going to be bad? Because if you look, for instance, at the past century, probably the most exciting thing that happened, the internet. Initially, we didn't know that it would be used for all the things we're doing today. A lot of things, that was just a dream of connecting one computer with another computer. Nobody was thinking about, Amazon, Google, all the other things that came out of that. So somehow, I think, don't we need innovation anyway, a bit like nature. Nature does mutation almost randomly. Well, nature randomly, but no, in our case, shouldn't we think about innovation as almost a random process, and then hopefully something good will come out of it. But can we say from the beginning that actually something is a good innovation or a bad one?
But if I can say, Serge got it right, which is that you don't want to be passive about this. If innovation is just random, what you want to do is use selection, keep the good parts, stop the bad parts. That's the way you make progress.
But shouldn't progress be the selection process and not an alternative to innovation, or something that comes after innovation, because then initially you might want to try as many options as possible.
Edward, you haven't had a chance to come in yet, please.
So I agree with what's been said here. I agree strongly with Paul, who my own work on cities was very much motivated by his work on growth coming from ideas flitting from person to person or place to place. But we've certainly learned over the past 2 years that the downsides of density or global connection are even more severe than we thought. If we go back to the 19th century, which was an early age of globalization, we saw a period in which plagues like yellow fever and then cholera traveled across the globe, killing urbanites at levels that are 10 times higher than COVID-19 did. Mm-hmm. But our cities continued to grow during that time period and continued to be seedbeds of innovation precisely because urbanites came together and made investments collectively that, in a sense, pandemic-proofed their cities. They invested in clean water above all. They invested in incentives that would complement the infrastructure, like health inspections that required tenement owners to connect to the water system, and they invested in institutions that would maintain and protect those systems. I continue to think the most important lesson of this current pandemic is that a disease that starts anywhere can spread anywhere. And that really requires us to invest not just in our own cities, but in the cities of the developing world, where connections between human beings and animals can lead towards disease spreading, where a tendency to rely on antibiotics rather than sewer systems enable superbugs to emerge that are antibiotic resistant. And so really, we have to treat these repositories of innovation with the respect that they deserve and make the kind of global investments they need to remain safe and functional.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not quite sure whether we've finished the progress innovation debate yet, but
No, I just want to add that I don't think innovation is bad. For example, the example of the internet that you took, in my view, internet is a great progress. I would not call it innovation. It has a very positive aspects. And of course, you have to control all the problems which can come from it, but it is positive. Talking about the pandemic, I think that progress, before innovation, you had progress. So progress was all the science which was accumulated about the RNA, for example. And this was, nobody knew about the pandemic. We heard at the beginning of this talk that when one was planning the development of cities 4 years ago, the word pandemic was not pronounced. But at that time, there was an underground progress in biology to accumulate knowledge about RNA. And then when the need became to get a vaccine, it was possible to get it very quickly. This was an innovation, but this innovation was built on a long time scale progress in basic science. And so I want to advocate about basic science. In my view, the connection between progress and innovation is about the same connection that you can make between basic science and applied science. And you cannot separate them, but still there is a difference between the two.
But you need both. You need basic science and you need utilitarian science, absolutely.
Yeah.
As with the CFC example that Paul raised, yeah, exactly. Monica, I think you want to take us in a slightly different direction.
I would love to do that. Because thinking about innovation means not only thinking about the future, but also thinking a little bit about the past. And I'd like to think about innovation related to nature and to the animals with which we share our cities. And I want to tell a little story about trees. So I live in Los Angeles, and as it turns out, Los Angeles already has many more trees than it should naturally have for its rather dry Mediterranean environment. But there was a tree planting program, and they went into some of the lower income zones of the city and offered people free trees. And people said no. And I was fascinated because I thought, who hates trees? We are taught our whole lives. If you're coming from a middle-class background or an upper-class background, you're taught your whole life that nature is good and trees are good. But in this low-income area, trees were not good because birds would sit in the tree and dirty your car, and then that would be an expense. And then the trees would pull up the sidewalk, and that would be an expense. And the trees need trimming, and that would be an expense. And that radically changed my sense of understanding where people come from when it comes to nature or innovation or progress or all of these kinds of things. And it makes me recall also the conversations this morning from the youth groups and the citizens' councils. So when it comes to innovations, I think that one of our most important innovations is a mental one, which is question every assumption.
Nicely said. Thank you. Yes, it's a good story. As Francis Arnold said, it's all about people. It's all, exactly. So, in the light of that, where are we going with innovation and cities? How do we make sure that we do really produce the cities that we need, that people in general need? It's a huge question. Does anybody want to tackle it? Paul, would you like to have a go?
Well, let me just say that I think the most difficult part of this is understanding the interaction amongst people and how small perturbations, new systems like social media or political advertising can potentially radically change the interaction amongst people. My sense is that we have, across the globe, lost the capacity to do something like, say, CFCs may be profitable for you as a firm, but they're bad for the environment. We're going to stop doing them. I think we're seeing a kind of an erosion of the capacity of the government to act, obviously with respect to climate change. But on many other dimensions, we've lost that capacity to act, to create new things like municipal water. And I think the real question we have to ask is, how do we rebuild that collective capacity to respond?
Can I just quiz you on that a second, and others too? Because Mario Molina, the Nobel laureate who was so heavily behind that CFC research and the global agreement to reduce the use of and eliminate the use of CFCs, he used to tell that story as a story of hope, that we did it once, we can do it again. And he was saying that right up until his death last year. But you're saying that we did it once, but times have changed. That's very worrying.
Well, let me be clear. I think the response to the government policies, the rapid improvement in the sense that we found substitutes for the CFCs, is exactly what we can expect with respect to climate change. People always underestimate the capacity for the right kind of innovation to deliver a workaround for some problem that we face. So in that sense, I share his optimism. But what's discouraging is that our governments have lost this capacity to say, no, you can't do that, and thereby to create incentives to go find something else to do. And remember, it was the Reagan administration, a Republican administration, that said we're going to stop producing CFCs. And in this country, at least, I think there's no prospect of something like this. Something even technologically simple, like just limiting the leaks of methane, seems to be beyond the capacity of our governments right now. So I'm optimistic about technological possibilities, I'm a little discouraged about the ability of people to get themselves organized to take advantage of them.
I would love to hear others' thoughts on this pessimism. Sorry, Edward, do you want to come in? And then yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think it is right to be worried about our lack of public capacity. I think just congenitally, I am probably more optimistic than Paul, but I say that without a huge amount of evidence behind my optimism about this current state of American politics. I want to take a slightly different tack on.
But Ed, you're younger. No wonder you're still optimistic. I'm turning into a grumpy old guy.
So I want to take a different tack to innovation, which is I want to emphasize the people who are locked out of the innovation economy. I want to emphasize the failure of our cities to foment upward mobility in a way that they have historically. That is mostly an issue of education, but it is about all sorts of training and investment in the young. It's also about entrepreneurship. So, I believe strongly that we need certain types of regulation, right? I mean, I believe very strongly we need regulations related to health. I think that Paul's comments about, thinking about greater regulation of the truly behemoth organizations that we have at the top of the corporate food chain is an entirely reasonable starting point. But I believe it is also somewhat outrageous, particularly in the US, that we regulate the entrepreneurship of the poor so much more strictly than we regulate the entrepreneurship of the rich. If you want to start your internet phenomenon in your Harvard College dorm room, there is basically no regulation on you until you perhaps have 1 billion users and maybe have even hacked an election. If you want to start your cafe or grocery store that sells milk products 3 blocks away, you have 15 permits to get through. This is very much about a set of rules that are not designed around public health. They're designed around protecting insiders from competition. And it is crucial that we make sure that our cities are places not just of insiders, but places where outsiders can flourish and can bring their own genius to the process of making cities and making our world better.
Thank you. Jan.
John Kerry, the special climate envoy of the US President and former Secretary of State, came to Glasgow some weeks ago. He called the American mayors as heroes because, according to his understanding, the fact that American mayors and also governors stayed committed to tackling the climate change led to a fact that US actually did not fall that much short in what they did. And that is maybe putting this into the context of the topic of the whole event, that I'm much more optimistic about cities than national governments. And cities all around the world, have shown a stronger commitment to at least try to solve the wicked problems of our time.
Monica.
One thing that we know from cities in the long historical record is that they will continue to be here. That is not in doubt. We have not talked today about the death of cities or the disappearance of cities. We have accepted that they are the dominant form of settlement, and now it's our pleasant task and duty to try to make them better.
So, Jan, I don't know whether your optimism caused them to disappear, but we've lost our online guests. I don't think, it wasn't you. I don't know what's happened. But it looks like it's just the 4 of us now for a while. Thank you, Monica. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you. But Carlo, do you want to talk about this?
Maybe because we turn into, this kind of optimism or non-optimism. First of all, I think it was Karl Popper, I believe, that said that optimism is a duty. It's a duty because, the future is in our hands. It depends on what we do. And I'm also optimistic about cities, what cities can do, but I think cities should start doing things in a different way. Cities, many times, what they do, they look at best practices. They look at what other cities have done, and then, they just copy those lessons. Now, that maybe was okay once upon a time, but now, in the face of decarbonization, climate change, we don't have that time anymore. So what I think cities should do, and actually Helsinki is a very good example of what was done with the energy challenge, what cities should do is try to think more about moonshot, not about copying what others have done, because if you copy what others have done, you're just locking the future into the past, into solutions that maybe were okay 20 years ago, and you keep on replicating them. But I'm more thinking about moonshots, or think about the X Prize Foundation in the US, where you got a challenge and you solicit ideas globally to do that. And so I'm an optimist about cities, their ability to reinvent themselves, but I also think that cities should take more risk and try out things that haven't been tried before. And again, I mentioned this also because Jan was actually the person. Sorry, another technical issue. Jan was a person who launched this while mayor of Helsinki.
Yeah, we've done so well in this dialogue. No technical glitches at all until the end. Maybe they're just telling us that we ought to stop now.
Smart cities, technology wants to remind us of the fragility of them.
Yes. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yes. I think maybe they're just telling us we've been talking long enough. It's been an amazing day. Did you want to make a last point, Serge?
Yeah, maybe. I think that the most important issue is education. Education is essential because we have seen a decrease in rationality now in all areas and in all countries. A lot of people are discussing about the pros and cons of vaccination, about the GMOs, about nuclear energy. And if you ask them what is nuclear energy, they don't know what it is. But they have a very strong stand for or against. About GMO, it's the same. And this is very bad. And this problem has to be tackled. And the only way it can be done, I think, is by increasing the level of education of the people, not only giving them more science, but building in their minds the ability to analyze things and to have a critical mind. And this is true of the ordinary citizen, but it would be also very important for politicians. And I think that is essential.
Thank you. It's a wonderful thought to finish on. Thank you all very much for a fantastic closing discussion. Thank you.